In a small town lived a man named Richard, known for his intelligence, talent, and charisma. From a young age, he stood out in every crowd, his potential undeniable to anyone who met him. Yet, despite his gifts, Richard never seemed to reach his fullest potential. Instead, he lived a life marked by unfulfilled promise and restless dissatisfaction. Richard often heard voices in his head, voices that told him he was destined for greatness if only he would commit himself and use his talents. These voices, persistent and unyielding, urged him to rise above the ordinary, to embrace his gifts, and to make something extraordinary of his life. But Richard, for reasons even he couldn't fully understand, ignored them. Years passed, and Richard found himself drifting from job to job, never able to keep one for long. His charm and intelligence initially opened many doors, but his lack of commitment and follow-through inevitably closed them. Each new opportunity ended in disappointment, further deepening his sense of frustration and failure. Richard found love multiple times, but his relationships were fraught with mistakes and missteps. He often chose women based on superficial qualities, looks, status, or the excitement they brought into his life, rather than seeking deeper connections. His insecurities played a significant role in these choices. Richard feared vulnerability and avoided opening up about his true self, preferring the safety of shallow relationships. Richard's relationships were also influenced by his upbringing. Growing up without a father, he lacked a male role model to teach him how to be a man in relationships. This absence left a void in his understanding of love and commitment. He harbored a deep-seated anger towards men, stemming from his father's absence, which led him to reject the guidance of other men who tried to teach him about life and relationships. Richard turned away from those who could have helped him grow, preferring to navigate his struggles alone. In relationships, Richard had a tendency to cling to failed marriages and partnerships. He feared the loneliness that came with being single, so he stayed in relationships that did him no good, despite the clear signs of incompatibility and the emotional toll these relationships took on him. Richard opted to endure the pain rather than face the unknown. His unwillingness to leave toxic relationships meant that it was often the women who ultimately left him, unable to cope with the stagnation and turmoil. The aftermath of each breakup left Richard more disheartened than before. He would spend long nights lying awake, replaying his mistakes and wondering why he couldn't just find happiness. Depression settled in, deepening his feelings of inadequacy and hopelessness. The voices in his head, once filled with encouragement and potential with each new job, new woman, and new outlook on life, became a tormenting reminder of his failures. Every time he attempted to find contentment, the voices grew louder, haunting him with reminders of his untapped greatness. Richard lived in this haunting cycle of emotional bliss to emotional hurt, regret, guilt, and pain, year after year. He yearned for more out of life, always feeling a void that nothing seemed to fill. The voices in his head continued, pleading with him to do more, to be more, but he resisted, preferring the comfort of his routines and the familiarity of his discontent. Richard's refusal to heed the voices led him down a path of deep depression. The weight of unfulfilled potential and constant comparison to others gnawed at his spirit. He was never satisfied with any aspect of his life, always feeling that he was missing something crucial. Every time he tried to be content, the voices would grow louder, haunting him with reminders of what he could be. This incessant inner turmoil left him envious and jealous of others who seemed to have found their purpose. He watched friends and peers build successful careers, stable families, and fulfilling lives, while he remained stuck in a cycle of unfulfilled dreams. He envied their achievements, comparing himself to them and feeling inadequate. The voices never ceased, becoming a constant reminder of what he could be if only he tried. Yet Richard chose to live a life of quiet resignation, too afraid or unwilling to step into the greatness that seemed just out of reach. As the years slipped by, Richard's potential remained just that, potential. By the time he reached 60, Richard was a shadow of the man he could have been. Alone and embittered, he harbored a deep resentment towards the world and himself. His life, once filled with promise, had become a series of regrets. He felt cheated by the constant voices that denied him peace, voices that kept him from simply living a normal life. Richard died at the age of 60 of a sudden and fatal heart attack. His life ended in solitude and anger. He found himself standing before God, his heart heavy with unfulfilled dreams and unanswered questions. Desperately, he asked God, "Why did I live my whole life without any real fulfillment or satisfaction? Why was I plagued by these voices, never allowed to be content?" God looked at Richard with compassion and sadness. "Those voices in your head were me," he said gently. "I had great plans for you, Richard. The talents and gifts I gave you were meant to be used, to bring you joy and fulfillment, and to make a difference in the world. The voices were my way of reminding you of your potential and encouraging you to rise to the greatness I had destined for you. But you chose not to listen, and instead of embracing your gifts, you let fear and complacency hold you back. Your potential was never meant to remain just a promise, but a reality you could live every day. And I am saddened by the fact that many hear these same voices in their head and heart, and they choose to answer and carry out the plans I have for them. But you, Richard, you did not. When you didn't use the talents I gave you, I brought you home to be with me." Richard felt a profound sorrow and regret, realizing too late the true purpose of the voices that had haunted him throughout his life. In that moment, he understood that his unfulfilled life was not a punishment, but a missed opportunity to become the man he was always meant to be. God, in his infinite mercy, welcomed Richard into his embrace, offering him the peace and fulfillment he had sought all his life. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an adventure. Your support means the world to me. Stay tuned for the next video, where another captivating tale awaits. See you soon on Sir Fables.